Amen. See if I can do this without quite so much interference. Maybe that'll be about the right level. Is that decent in the back? Anybody that's in the foyer that can't hear me very good, just poke your head out and I'll adjust as needed. Good morning again. We're working on lesson 4. That's our lesson of the morning. Of course, if you've gotten here and you don't have a book, we have books in the back on the back table. It's the David and Solomon book. That's what we're following along with. What's focusing our attention on the passage of Scripture. Of course, we're looking at things in it. And we're also pulling some things not strictly from the class book as well. This morning I thought I'd do things just a little bit different than my typical thing. I normally follow the book pretty closely, but I thought since we've went over quite a bit we've went up to the lead into this a little bit. I know last week we had a little bit, it ended the scripture itself ended part way through 15. Now we're jumping over to 18. So what I thought I would do is I'd try to fill in a little bit of the gaps for background to catch up a little bit of that. So we're going to have a little bit of a lengthy reading this morning in places. And then I actually thought I would do something very unusual for me, and I thought I would work backwards in the book. And that's a little different. Normally I follow pretty close with the material in the book itself, but just an opinion, the material's not super deep on this in any way. It kind of skims across the material a little bit. It doesn't really go any real depth. And as well, we had our brother Chris that was here on Wednesday. So anyone that was able to catch that, if they weren't physically able to be here, they caught it potentially on the recordings online or the conference call. Then he did a pretty good overview of the entire things leading up to this, as well as the events of this lesson. So what I thought I would do is actually have the reading, a little bit of a lengthy reading, and then actually jump over to our applications on page 39, get into some of the discussion questions, start making application for some principles that we have that are maybe not explicitly laid out in the book, and try to get into a little bit of things that not only just the history of what happened, but how we can prepare ourselves to deal with problems that we may be facing in the future ourselves. So anyway, that's the plan for this morning. I'm going to go back to, probably go back to chapter 16. Last week the material ended halfway through 15, and I believe our brother went, in addition to that, finished out 15. So I thought I'd hit 16 and 17. Like I said, it's a little bit of a lengthy reading, so bear with us. And then I would go into 18. I'm not going to go beyond the text on 18 because the next lesson picks up in verse 19 of 2 Samuel 18, and I don't want to steal the thunder for next week and cross over into that. So anyway. I'm going to begin the reading on chapter 16. I'll read a little ways, and then if there's anyone else that would like to read, you can raise your hand. If not, I'll continue on and read. By the way, if I know everybody does things a little different, if there's anything that we need to stop and deal with, just get my attention. And if you have thought, question, comment that you'd like to deal with at the time, then just go ahead and get my attention, and we'll call on you for the Bible class. It's a little bit of an open format here in the Bible class session. All right, so we're going to start in 16 this time. The actual text of the lesson starts on 18. Yes, that book. No, what chapter in that? It's chapter 4. Chapter 4. So chapter 4 in the book, 2 Samuel, backtracking to 16. Now when David had passed a little beyond the summit, behold, Ziba the servant of Mephibosheth met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them were 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a jug of wine. And the king said to Ziba, Why do you have these? And Ziba said, The donkeys are for the king's household to ride, and the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for whoever is faint in the wilderness to drink. Then the king said, And where is your master's son? And Ziba said to the king, Behold, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, Today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. So the king said to Ziba, Behold, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. And Ziba said, I prostrate myself. Let me find favor in your sight, O my lord the king. When King David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing continually as he came. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David and all the people and all the mighty men who were at his right hand and his left. And thus Shimei said when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed and worthless fellow. The Lord has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. And behold, you are taken in your own evil, and for you are a man of bloodshed. Then Abishai the son of Zeruiah said to the king, Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over now and cut off his head. But the king said, What have I to do you, O sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, and if the Lord has told him, Curse David, then who shall say, Why have you done so? And then David said to Abishai and to all his servants, Behold, my son, who came out from me, seeks my life. How much more now this Benjamite? Let him alone, and let him curse. For the Lord has told him, Perhaps the Lord will look on my afflictions and return good to me instead of his cursing this day. So David and his men went on the way, and Shimei went along the hillside parallel with him. And as he went, he cursed and cast stones and threw dust at them. And the king and all the people who were with him arrived wearily and refreshed himself there. Then Absalom and all the men of Israel, entered Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. Now it came when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, Long live the king, long live the king. Then Absalom said to Hushai, Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why do you not go out with your friend? Then Hushai said to Absalom, No, for whom the Lord, this people, and all the men of Israel have chosen, this will I be, and with him I will remain. And besides, whom shall I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son? As I have served in your father's presence, so I will in your presence. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, Give your advice, what shall we do? And Ahithophel said to Absalom, Go into your father's concubines, who is left to keep the house. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself odious to your father. The hands of all those who are with you will also be strengthened. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. And the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one inquired of the Lord of God. So was all the advice of Ahithophel regarded by both David and Absalom. Would anyone like to read a few verses in 17? That's a long reading, brother. I appreciate you doing it. I'm going to read a few more verses, and if there's anyone that would like to pick up a few after that, feel free to. Then Hushai said to Zadok and to Abiathar the priest, this is what I have trouble with that name. Ahithophel counseled Absalom and the elders of Israel, and this is what I have counseled. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, do not spend the night at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be destroyed. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel, and a maidservant would go up and tell them, and they would go and tell King David, for they could not be seen entering the city. But a lad did see them and told Absalom. So the two of them departed quickly and came to the house of a man in Barum who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. And the woman took a covering and spread it over the well's mouth and scattered grain on it, so that nothing was known. Then Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house and said, where Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said to them, they have crossed the brook of water. And when they searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. And it came about after they had departed that they came up out of the well and went and told King David. And they said to David, arise and cross over the waters quickly, for this Ahithophel has counseled against you. Then David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed the Jordan. And by dawn, not even one remained who had not crossed the Jordan. Now when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and arose and went to his home, to his city, and set his house in order, and strangled himself. Thus he died and was buried in the grave of his father. And then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom set Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Now Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Ithra the Israelite, who went in to Abigail the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Israel and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. Now when David had come to Mahanaim, Shobi the son of Nahash from Rabbath of the sons of Ammon, Machir the son of Amiel from Lodebar, and Barzillai the Gileonite from Rogelim brought. Isn't it funny when a redneck reads Hebrew names? Yes, sir. Now I've got an idea on why they didn't include this in the text. Brought beds, basins, pottery, wheat, barley, flour, parched grains, beans, lentils, parched seed, honey, curd, sheep, and cheese on the herd for David and for the people who are with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. And I did not think that reading through all the way, otherwise I'd have skipped part of it. But I thought it was important, brothers and sisters, that we get a little bit of context, because we literally have about a 2-chapter dead spot in our text. And I understand we can't cover everything, but I wanted to give some sort of a context to where even if you haven't backtracked and read it on your own, you have a little bit of context for what's coming up next in our text, which actually starts right now. So if I could get someone to read maybe 9 verses and then someone else to read the other 9, then then we'll go from there.
Then David took account of the people who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent the people out, a third under the command of Joab, a third under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I myself will certainly go out for you also. But the people said, you should not go out, for if in fact we flee, they will not care about us, and if half of us die, they will not care about us, but you are worth 10,000 of us. So now it is better that you will be ready and ready to help us from the city. Then the king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and thousands. But the king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently with the young man Solomon for my sake, Absalom for my sake. And all the people heard what the king commanded all the commanders regarding Absalom. Then the people went out to the field against Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. The people of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the slaughter For the battle there was spread over the whole countryside, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. Then Absalom encountered the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the branches of a massive oak. Then his head caught firmly in the oak, and he was left hanging between the sky and earth, while the mule that was under him kept going.
Thank you, brother. Anyone would like to read the other 9 verses, or would you like me to catch it? Anyone? Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Brother Chuck. Thank you, Brother Jim. I appreciate all your help this morning. I know that was quite lengthy. That took about, maybe about 15, almost 20 minutes of what we've, of class time, but I thought I wanted to be sure to get some context, to get the actual text out there to where we could see what had happened. I think it's important to have context anytime you're reading the scriptures to understand the big picture of what's going on. I can't speak for anyone else, but I remember as a child, I want to think I was maybe around 7 or 8 years old. I remember somewhere in that ballpark hearing the story of Absalom and how he tried to take over the kingdom, how him and David wound up basically going to war with each other for a period of time. And I remember in one of the class books, right around this time, there was a picture of a dark-haired young man with lots of hair literally hanging from an oak tree or something that appeared to be an oak tree. Of course, we have an oak tree, and then it says it's I guess it's a specific type of oak. I'm not really a botanist type guy, but and with his mule literally running out from under him. I remember as a kid thinking that was an intense picture, just like, wow, that's. I've never had hair long enough to put into a braid, much less to catch in a tree. But that's quite the thing. And then on top of that, that's a way to go out. He hung by his hair for probably a fair bit of time, and then he gets 3 spears to the heart, or I guess more specifically 3 javelins to the heart, and then gets hacked by 10 young men that want to join in. So that's a bad way of dying. Yes, ma'am, I'm on.
Actually, that picture was wrong, because verse 9 says he hung by his head, not his hair.
Oh, Mama, I split hairs with you on that one. Pardon the pun. I split hairs. I mean, I've been bald before.
Like never by the head of your head.
There is, but I we also have Jesus being nailed with his hands to the cross, but we have that being actually the word. I haven't got into the Greek enough to be able to say what, or not Greek, I guess it'd be Hebrew at this point, but I haven't got into it at all, so I can't tell you if that means literally from the neck up in that word, or if it literally would mean the head. But anyway, that's, you know, it seems like a bad way to go one way or the other. So we have the story of this, and we understand that we understand that really the big thing is that all goes back to the sin of David, and what was prophesied after that, where David and Bathsheba committed adultery, and then on top of that he had Bathsheba's wife Uriah the Hittite, had him killed, and literally this is all goes as the fulfillment of prophecy that was prophesied to him of what would happen, and so it all goes into that. So what I thought I would look at is we actually skip most of our chapter in our book and actually go over to the applications, and then I wanted to look at that and bring in some additional scriptures and start thinking about some ways that we can take some lessons we can glean from this, and about getting ourselves more prepared for the future as Christians. Anyone want to pause it for a minute? Anyone thought, comment, question, anything along those lines before we get started? Okay, well, if you'll turn over to page 39 and look at the applications. And so the application is number 1, and then we'll go down to number 2 in just a minute. And it says, although David did not want to wage war against his son and the Israelites who followed him, he understood the necessity of that task. Consequently, he did what he could to prepare for the battle. There are times in life when we also must do unpleasant things. For example, we may be forced to confront sinful or harmful behavior in the life of a close relative or friend. Before doing so, we must make the necessary preparations. This begins with living in a godly way, and that's from Matthew 7, 1 through 5, and we'll turn there in just a moment. We must also make sure our motives are pure. So if you'd like to, go ahead and turn over to Matthew chapter 7. I'll be turning there and reading from that. And we're going to read 1 through 5. We're going to read 1 through 5. Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5, and I'm reading, all my readings from here on in will be from the New American Standard, and actually the reading I already had was from the New American Standard. It says, do not judge lest you be judged, for in the way you judge you will be judged, and by your standard of measure it will be measured to you. And why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So, we need to make sure we're squared away before we get ready to deal with various unpleasant confrontations that we're going to deal with in life. And then as we're looking at them, we have the motivation from 1 Timothy chapter 5, and that deals with love from a pure heart. So let's pause and think. I may be just back and forth a little bit. I apologize. Bear with me, if you will. But let's pause and think about the pain that must have been going through David's whole, his whole being, really, when he had to get ready to fight his own son, Absalom. His son was literally trying to kill him, trying to take over the throne. Absalom had long pent-up anger, and of course we understand where the root of all of that was, and we'll get into a little bit of that just a little bit from now. But before we do, let's think about that for a minute. I have a son. I have a 3-year-old son. Oh, excuse me, 4. Goodness. I have a 4-year-old son. I have a daughter, and the love that I have for them just absolutely, it would blow my mind absolutely if I kind of had to have any just absolute major confrontations. And this is about as most major confrontation as you can have, is for someone literally to be ready to take your life. Now, the whole, I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, just bear with me if you will, please. The hatred that had to be in Absalom's heart for his father, to be ready to take his own father's life, that has to be overriding anything else of any good sense in his mind. The brutality that he had in mind for that's intense, and it's I don't know, I have a hard time wrapping my head around that a son could be so angry, so bitter towards his father that he would do that. And so it's something that really boggles the mind. As we look and we look and make application towards us, as far as, and this is what the lesson mentions, is that we need to do unpleasant things, even if it's something we don't want to do. We have to be ready for unpleasant confrontations. We have to be ready for things that we don't want to do on a physical and certainly of a spiritual nature. I'd like to maybe use the example of whether it be mother, mother-in-law, father, father-in-law, sister, brother, child. If we encounter, if we know about someone that's living in sin, and we have to have those unpleasant discussions, those confrontations, those things that could really be make or break on a relationship. Let's think about the courage it takes and the necessity of having those confrontations with someone in order to look at trying to get them to turn away from the way that they're living, and to help them to repent and to save their soul. Any thoughts? Pause it for a minute, comments, anything we want to look at right there before we get into that further. Go ahead, brother.
Well, to back up to your point, I guess I look at, or I perceive Absalom's motivation really, rather than hate for his father, to be just his ambition. I mean, to me, that's the whole thing that's driving him. You know, he's worked at this and worked at this to try to steal the hearts of the people. So I think David did his way. I mean, that's the reason he's going to get rid of David, in my view, rather than because he is so angry necessarily with his dad. It's just that he wants to be king. He's got that just unbridled ambition. And anything that's in his way, you know, he can't be king while you've got a king. So
Certainly true. I would also add to that, I would agree with you in much in part on that, brother, that there's a large amount of ambition being the driving thing. I would also backtrack for just a minute and look at that. Basically, Absalom's full sister was raped, and that was right. Now, that would be, I say, was what the catalyst of the whole thing, and that was and he literally sat on it for 2 years. Am I right on 2 years? He sat on that anger for 2 years, and then of course he took the life of his half brother, and then of course we know what happened from there. The ambition and everything set in. Even if it wasn't there previously, and it very well could have been, that seems to be the root, which really goes back to one of the big things I wanted to make, and I didn't really have a good transition to it, but Brother Jim, you kind of gave me that right there, is the thing I look, and I try to look at this on any of the lessons we're dealing with, is what can I take from this? And what can I take from this? And even though that I don't live in ancient times, and I do have a sister, and you know but I'm not exactly in their situation, so it doesn't really line up perfectly. I'm not the king, also. So but what can I take this and apply it to me? and I see that I see and I look at the relationship of sin at the start and how sin snowballs and goes further and further and further and further. And I've watched a lot of old Andy Griffith reruns. I'm far too young to have been alive to see them when they first came in. But the old sound bite we have from Barney is that you got to nip it in the bud, nip it in the bud, nip it in the bud. And that literally stuck out in my mind over and over again. And it was an application to sin. It's like when, to nip it in the bud. I mean, we're all going to sin, but to address it, repent, realize that that's what I've sinned, and then repent, and then don't let it continue to snowball and snowball, which is really what happened here. That we have, and I've got a breakdown if we've got time to it, really the snowball effect from it, of how those two sins, the adultery and then the murder to cover it up, how that snowballed into everything that we're dealing with here. I'd like to skip over and look at a couple things because the question is really is how can we prepare ourselves for that? And I'd like to look at Romans chapter 12 for just a minute. If you'd like to turn over there with, feel free. Romans chapter 12 is my favorite chapter in the Bible, and I can quote a fair bit of it, but I'd like to read the first two verses of Romans chapter 12, and then I'd like to look at a couple scriptures from the book of 2 Timothy. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 say, I urge you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. So we're to present our bodies a living and holy sacrifice. So really when it comes down to the question of the hour, as far as I'm concerned, what can I do to prepare myself to deal with those unpleasant confrontations that are a necessity? Is number one, I can prepare myself by be transformed, but through the renewing mind, that way I can prove what the will of God is. I have to be going back to Matthew chapter 7. It's really dealing with hypocritical judgment, and you get away from that by not being a hypocrite. So that's what we can do to deal with those confrontations. 2 Timothy 2:15 is where I'm going next, and then of course stay over there, and then I'm going to deal with a little bit from 2 Timothy 3. So 2 Timothy 2:15, we pretty much all know this scripture pretty well. It says, be diligent to present yourself approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, handling accurately the words of truth. And then chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 is all scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. That really is the whole, we need to be in the Word. We need to be able to prepare ourselves through the Word and through how we live and how we apply the Word to the way we live, that way that we can be ready for those spiritual confrontations. Let's turn over to page 41. We've got about 7 minutes, which is a little less time than I thought I'd have right now. I've kind of rambled on a little bit, but let's turn over there and catch some of the discussion. And I'd like to open up the floor on these. Anyone that would like to answer, please do. We've kind of already set the stage, so they ought to be able to from what we already looked at, to be able to answer these. Number one says, what can we learn from the preparations David made before the battle? And I know that really gets in with the text a lot, but what can we learn from him preparing himself for battle? What we must do? And go ahead, brother. that's why I put them down under the applications, because they tie in the applications. But I really, when I was looking at these discussions, that's why I wanted to go ahead and put them in, because I wrote down we must prepare ourselves for unpleasant confrontations. And that, of course, we understand that there's things, physical confrontations that we may have to deal with from time to time in this life, but the greatest importance is, of course, on the spiritual and preparing ourselves for that. One thing that we didn't really touch on much of, that we only read through, number 2 says, what does David's appeal for Absalom's life tell us about David? He loved him. He absolutely loved him. David understood David understood the consequences of his action. He didn't understand the specifics of it, but we have David repenting after those actions, after he sinned. So his attitude seems to have changed after that. And he never lost his love for his son.
Just a side of that, but I think in a way, from a battle standpoint here, David's heart overruled his head.
Mm-hmm.
He's asking Joab and the army kind of to go in battle with one hand kind of tied behind him. So.
Oh, absolutely, and that's.
And that's next week's lesson is dealing with some of this, but that's, from a standpoint of war, this wouldn't be, it'd be like us, the Allies in World War II saying, we're going to go fight the Germans, do please spare Hitler,
Right, you're right. I can get on a whole long discussion about going into war with one hand tied behind your back, as far as it'd be strictly a secular conversation, but that's, David's a great warrior, but we'd see that apparently that David has mellowed out tremendously as he gets older, because the David as a young man would have had, I think would have a very different attitude towards a lot of things going into this. We see a bit of weakness on David's part as he ages, and as he doesn't deal with sin, which is really, he doesn't deal with the sin of his son raping his daughter. He gets angry. The only thing we have in the scriptures is that he got angry. Past that, it wasn't dealt with. He doesn't deal with Absalom taking matters into his own hands. He doesn't deal with that. He doesn't, and so it just goes over and over and more. But we absolutely see that the love of David has for his son, it overruled his rational thinking at times. Oh, absolutely, because you're not able to use your mass on that. Now, as we look at things from a modern standpoint, of course, you could, not that long ago Vietnam was, and that was that was very much jungle warfare. But in 2001 on, 2001, not so much, 2002 on it in some of the cities, and really big in Iraq in 2003, and until the end of that war, was you have an urban warfare, which I will tell you what I got taught in infantry school is I got taught U.S. doctrine, and also got taught that sometimes we don't follow it, and that's understandable, and you have to adapt things but U.S. Army doctrine is that we do not engage a force that we do not have a 3-to-1 advantage on, because you're going to take minimal losses when you're 3-to-1. Now, how that relates to this is that whether it be a forest, whether it be a jungle, or whether it be a city, you have significant obstacles in your way, and you're not able to use your troops to the way you would want to. So urban warfare, the U.S. doctrine, at least it was years ago, I'm assuming it's still the same thing because it hadn't been that long ago I was out of it, that I got out. that I retired. So urban doctrine is a 9-to-1 advantage. So you literally want triple of what you're dealing with. Because if you want that same, because that's the amount that close terrain takes away from your advantage. Your numerical advantage, when you're going house to house, you're going room to room, which is it's not similar, and yet the principles are, the fighting principles are not, but yet the sense of advantage, disadvantage is similar, that you're dealing with, you need a lot of people, but you don't need them on top of each other, and you need to be able to split people off this way and that way because it's really easy for people to maneuver and escape. So David's forces were quite, absolutely, absolutely. Because Absalom had the far larger forces. Yep. And we have, and I did not include this, but we literally have the meeting up as David's fleeing, and David tells him to go on in Jerusalem. Hey, you go on. You ain't part of this. Don't worry about it. And he's like, no, I'm coming with you. And then he's one of his 3 top commanders, like the next confrontation. So he must have been quite the dude to be able to get that to be. He must have been quite the warrior, of course. But let's think about this. And this is okay. So David set the terrain, or whether he did directly and he set it up, or whether his commanders kind of were someone set that up to where they would have the biggest advantage they were able to have. Now, how does that apply to us now? We need to prepare ourselves to be adept in understanding the situations that we have, and to, whether it be going into a discussion, debate, argument, whatever it is, that we need to be thinking ahead enough to be able to set the stage for our confrontations as much as possible. For example, and this is just it would behoove the brothers that live in Utah to be really spun up pretty well on the history of Mormonism and its doctrine, because they're going to be dealing with that on a very, very regular basis. Now, obviously, it behooves us to understand that as well, but we're not going to be dealing with that near to the extent. And I know I'm just about out of time if I hadn't. Does the second bell ring, or was that first? First, okay. The second one's about to ring. So, but it would behoove us to be squared away on the things that we're going to be confronting. And there's the second, if we understand that someone, if the person that we have a family member, let's just say, is into very much the New Age stuff, it might behoove us to have an idea of what they believe and why they believe that, to where that when we do have when we are appealing to them, that we can do so from where they're at right now, and whether sometimes people just straight up want to do bad things, but a lot of times people do it from reasons one way or the other, or people have the reasons they think the way they do, and let's go ahead and have ourselves squared away where we can deal with that on the terrain and that we find ourselves in life. That's all I've got. Thank you so much for all your attention, your help, the reading, and everything, for being here this morning. And we'll go ahead and have a break before we get into our worship hour.